Why did Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the hero of El Alamein, find himself on a collision course with the proud commanders of the American army he was supposed to be allied with? This was not a clash born of enemy action, but of ambition, strategy, and national pride on the blood-soaked stage of Normandy in the summer of 1944. The alliance between Great Britain and the United States was the bedrock of the Western Allied effort. But beneath the surface of shared purpose, a fierce and potentially destructive debate raged. At its heart was one man, the meticulous, confident, and often infuriatingly patronizing British commander, Field Marshal Montgomery. On one side, America's aggressive, hard-charging generals, like the fiery Omar Bradley and the flamboyant George S. Patton, chafed under his command. This is the story of the bitter command crisis that threatened to fracture the Allied high command at its most critical hour. It is a tale not of battles against the Germans, but of the battle for the very direction of the war in Europe. To understand the rift, we must go back to the very structure of Operation Overlord. In the winter of 1943 at the Tehran Conference, it was decided, the invasion of Northwest Europe would be commanded by an American, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. But for the ground assault phase, the crucial fight to get ashore and secure a foothold, the ground forces would be led by a single ground forces commander. That man was Bernard Montgomery. The choice was logical. Montgomery was Britain's most celebrated general, the only Allied commander with a major victory over the Germans at El Alamein. He was a master of the set-piece battle, of meticulous planning and overwhelming force. He was given command of all Allied ground forces for the initial landings. Under him were two armies, the British Second Army under Miles Dempsey and the U.S. First Army under Lieutenant General Omar Bradley. From the outset, Montgomery's command style grated. To the Americans he appeared vain, condescending, and relentlessly self-promoting. He spoke in absolutes, his famous certainty often interpreted as arrogance. Yet, his initial plan for Normandy was bold and expansive. He argued against a limited foothold. He envisioned a rapid capture of the key city of Caen on the British eastern flank on D-Day itself, using it as a pivot to draw in and grind down German panzer divisions, while the Americans broke out in the west. This was his master plan. But by June 12, 1944, Caen still lay in German hands. The British and Canadian forces were locked in a brutal, attritional struggle against the bulk of Germany's armored reserves. The Bocage country, a nightmarish landscape of small fields, towering hedgerows and sunken lanes, proved a defender's paradise, crippling the American advance. The campaign was not going to schedule. And as the advance stalled, the pressure mounted, and the fundamental differences in military philosophy between Montgomery and his American subordinates began to erupt. The first major crack appeared during Operation Goodwood, launched on July 18. Preceded by a massive carpet bombing by over 2,000 Allied aircraft, it was Montgomery's latest attempt to seize Caen and break the German line. In messages to Eisenhower and Churchill, Montgomery seemed to promise a decisive breakthrough. "I have decided," he signaled, "to loose the armored divisions into the open country to the south and southeast of Caen." American commanders, particularly General Omar Bradley, listened with keen interest. A breakthrough in the east could unhinge the entire German front. But after initial gains, Goodwood bogged down in the face of ferocious German defense, hampered by muddy ground churned up by the bombs. British armor losses were severe. The breakthrough did not materialize. In Washington and at Eisenhower's SAGF headquarters, frustration turned to anger. To them, it seemed Montgomery had overpromised and underdelivered, again. The American press began to openly question British fighting prowess. Behind the scenes, Eisenhower fumed, his chief of staff, General Walter Bedell Smith, even suggesting it was time to get rid of Montgomery. But Montgomery saw it differently. In his view, Goodwood was a showdown battle that had achieved its strategic goal. It had drawn the last German operational reserves onto the British sector, fatally weakening the front opposite the Americans. The enemy was fixed and bled white. The stage was now set, he insisted, for the American breakout. The Americans were not convinced. They saw a colleague making excuses for failure. This suspicion festered as Bradley prepared his own breakout plan, Operation Cobra, scheduled for July 25. Meanwhile, Montgomery's continued role as overall ground forces commander became a festering issue. Eisenhower planned to assume direct command of the ground battle once two army groups were operational, a move Montgomery resisted fiercely, seeing it as a demotion and a dangerous decentralization of command. The personal dynamics were toxic. Montgomery referred to Eisenhower as a chairman, not a commander, and viewed his strategic concept, a broad front advance into Germany, as hopelessly naive. The Americans saw Montgomery as dangerously cautious, a general who would not attack until the last button was sewn on the last gaiter of the last soldier. The atmosphere was thick with mutual resentment. Then, on August 1st, the command structure officially changed. The U.S. 12th Army Group under Bradley was activated, and the U.S. 3rd Army under the legendary George S. Patton sprang into existence, finally unleashed from its role as a fictional army group in the UK deception plan, Operation Fortitude. Patton, the most aggressively offensive-minded general in the Allied camp, was now subordinate to Bradley, but he was a loose cannon who idolized speed and despised what he perceived as Montgomery's timidity. The crisis was about to reach its boiling point. With the Americans finally breaking out at Cobra and Patton's Third Army racing south and then east into Brittany, a monumental opportunity presented itself. The German 7th Army, having committed its reserves against the British, was now threatened with encirclement near the town of Falaise. The question was, how to spring the trap. And it was here that the clash of personalities and strategies would explode into a full-blown confrontation that would echo through history. By August 8, 1944, the battlefield geometry had created a fleeting chance to annihilate the German army in Normandy. Patton's 15 Corps was advancing northwards from Le Mans towards Argenton. From the north, the newly activated 1st Canadian Army, under General Harry Crerar but with Montgomery's close oversight, was launching Operation Totalize, pushing south towards Falaise. The goal, link the two thrusts at Argenton, sealing the Falaise pocket. But Montgomery issued a critical directive. The boundary between the army groups would be set at Argenton. The Americans would halt there, the Canadians would push south to meet them. It was a decision based on coordination and the fear of a disastrous friendly fire incident between two converging armies. To Omar Bradley and more vehemently to George Patton, this was the height of overcaution. Patton's spearheads reached Argenton on August 12. Ahead of them was a wide, largely undefended gap stretching north to Falaise. The German escape route was narrowing by the hour, but it remained open. Patton famously begged Bradley, "Let me go on to Falaise and we'll drive the British back into the sea for another Dunkirk." He was convinced he could slam the door shut himself. But Bradley refused. He later cited intelligence warnings of significant German panzer strength to his east, a potential threat to his overextended columns. He also upheld Montgomery's boundary order. "Nothing doing," Bradley told Patton. "You're not to go beyond Argenton. Just stop where you are and build up on that shoulder." For Patton it was an unconscionable order. He saw glory and decisive victory being handed away by a British Field Marshal and an American general who lacked the stomach for the kill. The following days, from August 12 to the 16th, were an agony of missed opportunity. The Canadians and Poles, battling against desperate German resistance and their own growing pains as a new army, fought a brutal, slow fight south. The gap narrowed to a mere 10 miles, but it remained a corridor of hell, a shooting gallery, where Allied aircraft pounded a continuous stream of German men and vehicles. Yet the noose was not closed. At SAF, Eisenhower watched with mounting frustration. The chance to destroy an entire German army group was slipping away because the two wings of the Allied force were not acting as one. The blame, in the American press and in the minds of American commanders, fell squarely on Montgomery. He was accused of being slow, of letting the Canadians bear the brunt for national prestige, and of deliberately holding back the Americans to ensure a British-led victory. The coalition was under its greatest strain. The clash was no longer merely professional, it was personal, national, and threatening the very operational success of the campaign. The turning point in this command crisis was not a single battle, but a series of tense confrontations and a sober realization of the cost of discord. On August 19, Polish and American troops finally made contact at Chambois, sealing the Falaise pocket. The scene inside was apocalyptic, a wasteland of shattered equipment and corpses. Over 50,000 German soldiers were captured, but perhaps another 40,000 had escaped through the gap before it closed. While a massive victory, the consensus was that it should have been total annihilation. The recriminations flew immediately. Bradley and Patton were adamant. Montgomery's boundary decision had cost them the war-winning battle. Montgomery was equally adamant. His overall plan had worked perfectly, the Germans were routed, and Bradley had been right to be cautious about his eastern flank. The crisis demanded Eisenhower's direct intervention. The Supreme Commander was a master of alliance politics, but his patience with Montgomery was exhausted. A fierce exchange of cables ensued. Eisenhower bluntly told Montgomery that the ongoing failure to quickly secure the vital port of Cherbourg and now the perceived failure at Falaise were creating a storm of criticism. He insisted on the immediate implementation of his broad front strategy, advancing to the Rhine on all fronts, and made it clear Montgomery's period as de facto ground commander was over. Facing the potential dissolution of the alliance itself, Montgomery was forced to concede. In a tense meeting on August 23, he finally agreed to Eisenhower's strategic vision, though he would continue to lobby against it for months. The real turning point was psychological. The American commanders, now commanding the preponderance of men and material on the continent, had decisively asserted their operational independence and strategic influence. Montgomery's authority had been irreversibly checked. From this point forward, he commanded only the 21st Army Group, the British and Canadian forces. The Allies would fight as partners, not under a single ground commander. The clash had resolved itself not with a dismissal, but with a seismic shift in the balance of power within the Allied command. The legacy of the Montgomery-American clashes is complex. The Falaise Gap, while a crushing German defeat, remains a subject of what if among historians. Could Patton have closed it sooner? Most modern analysis suggests Bradley's fears of a German counterattack on his vulnerable flank were militarily prudent. The chaotic nature of the closing jaws likely would have led to fierce fratricide had the Americans pushed further north. Yet, the perception of lost opportunity permanently stained Montgomery's reputation in American eyes. The strategic argument, Montgomery's single thrust versus Eisenhower's broad front, was never resolved militarily. Montgomery believed to his dying day that a concentrated, fully supplied thrust under his command towards Berlin in the fall of 1944 would have ended the war by Christmas. Eisenhower, the politician general, believed only a broad front could maintain Allied cohesion and protect against German counterstrokes, a view vindicated by the surprise of the Battle of the Bulge in December. Ultimately, the clash was a necessary, if painful, growing pain of a coalition war. It pitted two military cultures against each other. The British, worn down by years of war and casualty conscious, favoring set-piece battles, and the Americans, fresh, abundantly supplied, and confident in their mobile, aggressive doctrine. The human element was inescapable. Montgomery's inability to offer praise or foster personal bonds made him a terrible diplomat for such a vital role. No medals were awarded for navigating this internal strife, but the true recognition lies in the fact that the alliance did not break. Despite the fury, the mutual suspicion, and the national rivalries, Eisenhower, Bradley, and even Patton continued to work within the system. Montgomery, though sidelined, continued to lead 21st Army Group with great skill through the Netherlands and across the Rhine. The coalition bent under the strain of his clashes with the American generals, but it did not break, a testament to the overriding commitment to a shared, vital goal, the defeat of Nazi Germany. The confrontations in Normandy were not fought with bullets and bayonets, but with maps, cables, and towering egos. They remind us that the path to victory in the greatest coalition war in history was paved with as much debate and friction as it was with courage and sacrifice. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Vault as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.